episode of the Dark Assassins podcast, the show that dives deep into not just technology, but the concepts, software, and procedures behind it all, and explains it so simply that even your grandma can understand it. As always, I'm your host, the Dark Assassin. One of the worst trends by far that has arisen during the rise of the internet age and the improvement of technology as a whole is the concept of physical media. And it has been disappearing before our very eyes over the past, decade, especially. Pretty much since streaming services became a thing, the concept of physical media has begun to dwindle significantly. But I mean, streaming services isn't the only thing. I mean, you also have the rise of online marketplaces, like for video games. Steam, for instance, is probably one of the biggest ones, where you can buy video games online. But of course, you're not actually getting the physical disc, cartridge, or whatever for the game. You're just getting a digital download. Back in the day, we had things like it was a transition, right? Like physical media still existed, but it was more of a transition thing. Like you went from floppy disks to CDs to flash drives, you went from VHS to DVD to Blu-ray. The physical media concept always existed. It was just kind of shifting with the times to, be more dense, be able to hold more data, have higher bit rates, bandwidth, be able to store more with the increasingly large file sizes. I mean, part of that too was, the increased, graphical capabilities, and resolutions as, technology continued to improve. But nowadays, everything seems to be going digital, whether you like it or not, which is fine on the one hand if you can own all of the digital assets, but let's be honest, you do not own all of the digital assets. Like, having a movie collection as a bunch of, MP4s or whatever on your NAS that you stream to your streaming service is one thing. I mean, you have all of that media which you totally acquired legally and didn't sail the high seas for. That's one thing. But the other side is if you're just streaming it directly from a provider, in which case they own it and they have the ability to take it away whenever they want. And sometimes, even if you buy the media on the platform, if something happens with that company, you could still lose access to the media that you purchased. See Crunchyroll, for example. So the issue again here is, well, I guess to take a step back, video games had been one of the final holdouts. I mean, Steam and PC gaming notwithstanding, but console gaming was one of the last holdouts for physical media. But unfortunately, there has been a major blow struck in this department, and I feel like this is going to be a slippery slope cascading effect into physical media being completely gone from the video game industry, which is definitely a bummer for anyone who likes to actually have physical copies of their games, which includes myself. Now, I guess you could also make the argument that the concept of physical versus digital media has kind of gone by the wayside anyway in recent years, because if you play any modern game, for whatever reason, most of them seem to require an internet connection for whatever reason, even though they don't need one. And then you, of course, have the issue of games coming out and having first day patches. So, yes, you have the original game, but if you don't have the internet to download the updates, it's borderline unusable. So, at that point, it's almost just acting like a very expensive, fancy looking digital key rather than downloading it from a store, but I digress. The point of physical media, at least back in the day, and I would like to hope into the future, is you don't need to have the corporation, the video game manufacturer, the platform that created it to still be active and supporting it for you to be able to enjoy your game. Think of cartridge gaming from, back in the 80s, 90s, and even the early 2000s. All of that was done offline. It doesn't matter if those companies exist anymore. You can still plug in those cartridges into your console and play them like you did when they were new. And that is one of the nice things about physical media is you're not tied to the whims of the internet or the company that runs the gaming streaming service or what have you. Um, but that's just one of the things we're going to talk about. We also have to address the elephant in the room, which is the fact that Apple has increased their prices in some places rather drastically, and I have been silent on it, partly because I haven't really made an episode since it launched. I think, or I guess since it happened. I think the last episode we came out with was like right as all this was kind of starting to come out. Of course, it has been like a month now, so we got a lot to talk about there. And then, of course, the punches just keep on coming because we're going to talk about the whole flock issue. If you haven't heard about Flock, oh boy, buckle your seatbelts since that's going to be a fun one. And as Van Halen once said, you got to roll with the punches to get to what's real because we got a lot of punches being thrown at us as of late. But before we get too deep into anything, let's start off with our trivia question for the week. This week's trivia question, speaking of physical media, when was the Blu ray disc technology released? So, when was Blu ray disc technology released? And that is your trivia question for the week. So, let us start with the elephant in the room, that being Apple's price hikes. Now, before I get crucified for being an Apple shill or an Apple sheep or something to that effect, I don't think we should be that shocked at their recent price hikes or that this should be all that unexpected. Now, let's be real, when Apple announced products in like the past year or so, I think everyone was pretty surprised that there weren't any price increases. Like there was rumors when the iPhone 17 was coming out that they were going to increase the prices and technically they did, but it was one of those things where yes, they increased the price, but they also gave you more base storage, so you could make the argument that if you would have got that upgrade anyway, it's the same price kind of a deal. So there was some arguments to be made that they didn't technically raise prices, but if you look at other technologies like say the MacBook Air, for instance, when that came out with the M5, or the MacBook Neo recently, those were priced fairly low. The MacBook Air did not change, if I recall correctly. And everyone was kind of surprised by that, considering everything else in the industry, especially RAM and storage prices, were kind of going to the moon, as we talked about how much RAM has increased over the past few years. Um, but then they just came out with like a press release and announced that, oh, yeah, by the way, we're raising prices on everything. And some of it's fairly innocuous. 30 bucks at like the lowest end to like over $1,000 at the highest end. Now, of course, that's going to be like a scale factor. Like the cheapest thing was like the HomePod Mini, which was only $100 to begin with, and now it's like 130. And then, of course, you had on the high end like the maxed out Mac Studio, which comes with a higher price tag off the bat and gets a more significant price increase. But I think the now, of course, Apple here is citing, supply chain costs, mainly RAM storage and tariffs, for instance, for these price increases. And I think most people would be quick to point out that yes, Apple might be seeing some increases in the cost of their supply chain, but their margins are already so high on these products that they could easily just eat them. And that is almost certainly a valid point. I'm not in on all of Apple's financials. I'm not up to date on all that. But I think it's probably a fairly fair assumption that Apple does have some pretty healthy margins on some of their products. So they probably could have eaten it if they really wanted to, but that would have, of course, when you get to like the whole shareholder thing and how much money we made versus how much we spent, all that stuff, it probably wouldn't look as good for them even if they still technically did turn a profit. Their net gains wouldn't be as high as they were previously, and investors don't like that. So that's probably kind of where it's coming from. But honestly, I think the real bummer is how they unveiled these price hikes. Now, it's really easy to Monday morning quarterback this, but I think if, like, for instance, the MacBook Air and MacBook Neo, if you were to buy one of those when they launched versus now, it's the same exact product, but now you're paying like 100 or 200 or whatever more dollars for it, and it's the same exact thing. So if you were waiting a little bit to kind of save up some money to buy one of these things, you kind of got screwed in that sense because now you have to pay more for the same thing. So that's a real bummer. But like I said, it's the Monday morning quarterback approach is I don't necessarily understand like if they were going to increase prices and I feel like they probably wanted to. I don't know why when you launch these new products, you don't launch them at the higher price points. Like the MacBook Air, of course, you're going to get backlash regardless because you didn't redesign the thing and all you did was give it a spec update and you're increasing the price. Nobody would like that to begin with. But the fact that you launched it at one price and then like a month or two later you increase the price, I think that's probably worse in my opinion than if you just launched it at the higher price because people would get over that I think a lot quicker than oh they jacked up the prices on us, right? And the MacBook Neo, I mean it was already priced pretty reasonably, like even with the price increase it now starts I think with the student discount at like was it 6.99 now instead of 5.99 or something. I think even if you launched it at that price, like people would probably still be okay with that, but because you launched at the lower price and then increased it a few months later to the higher price, that's where people kind of have the pushback. And I think it also goes the same thing with all the other products that they announced in these price hikes. Like why don't you just wait until the next product comes out, like the next generation, when you put the new chips in it or whatever, and then increase the prices? I think it's a lot easier for people to swallow. I don't know, maybe they were just trying to do like the rip the band aid off approach. And if we just get them all out now, people will be mad all at once rather than every time we launch a new product. That could be one approach. I think realistically, what they're probably thinking, and I can almost guarantee you that this is going to happen in their upcoming, keynotes, is they'll unveil a new generation of products. Say the new MacBook Pros come out with the new chips, right? And what they're going to do is they're going to be like at the same price as it is right now. It's like, yes, but you also increased it kind of significantly a couple months ago. Remember that? So Apple, I think, is going to try to strategically play this into yes, we increased the prices, but because that was several months ago, we can now say it's the same price as the previous one. That is what I'm pretty sure they're going to do. I mean, of course, time will tell as their events come up this fall, but I think you can probably, if you wanted to make a bingo card, I think you could probably put that on your bingo card and you would be a pretty safe bet that that's going to happen. Now, when we're talking about the price hikes, this isn't just for the Max. Now, the Max probably is the more notable one just because of how more significant the price hikes are for some of them, but it could be as innocent as like $100, or like I said for the HomePod Mini, just 30, or in the case of the M3 Ultra Max Studio, $1,200, which that's a big yikes. But to be honest, I'm not sure who in their right mind is buying an M3 Ultra Max Studio right now in 2026, considering how old the M3 chip is at this point. But if you were planning on buying one, this is probably another reason why you shouldn't and just wait for the new one if you really need the Ultra version of the Mac Studio. Now, like I said, the least egregious one is the HomePod Mini, but I mean, that's going from technically it was $99 to now it's $129 for a tiny little smart speaker. I mean, you could still make the argument that that's kind of egregious. But still, I mean, I think it's kind of more of like a percentage thing at that point. But yeah, so still, I mean, 30 bucks, but is 30 bucks going to break the bank for someone on buying a HomePod Mini? Maybe, maybe not. But yes, but regardless, price hikes basically across the board. So that is kind of a rip for Apple. But again, like I said, I'm fairly confident. Like I would say 90, I would say there's a 90% chance that in Apple's upcoming keynotes, they make the point to say that it's the same price or the price is still at, and then list the current price that they hiked it to. That's just my educated guess. But with that, let's get into this week's cybersecurity tip. Now, this week's cybersecurity tip is probably one that you have heard on the show before, and that is to not use WordPress. Because, in a surprise to absolutely nobody, WordPress has been hacked yet again. And how did it get hacked again? Through its plugins, because that's how it always gets hacked. Which, I mean, in WordPress's defense, if you as a software application open the door up to third party plugins that and you give API access to third party plugins to do things, you're kind of at the whim of the third party plugin, right? It's like one of those things where you're dealing with whatever the weakest link is where the chain's going to break, and usually that's in like the third party plugins is where the chain is usually the weakest, and that's where threat actors like to target. But surprisingly, this wasn't some like new vulnerability that someone just discovered in a WordPress plugin. What actually happened here is some cyber criminals had some pretty terrible OPSEC or operation security and left their server completely wide open. And their hacking tools, activity logs, and target lists, naming more than 1.4 million websites, got leaked slash got found out. Which is how this gigantic WordPress hack got kind of unveiled. Um, Now, I guess to clarify here, the target list was 1.4 million accounts, but that's not the number of websites that actually got broken into. That's just the number of websites that this hacker group was targeting, not necessarily the ones they got into. So, what was discovered, amongst other things, is a massive number of vulnerabilities being exploited in WordPress plugins, the most notable of which being the Breeze caching plugin. That was by far the worst offender of the bunch. Now, like I said, this is nothing new. These kinds of vulnerabilities and issues with WordPress have been around probably since its inception, but at least for the past like 10 to 15 years or so, it seems like every few months or every year or something like that, every other year, fairly on a fairly regular basis, you can kind of pencil in vulnerability with WordPress or major CVE with WordPress or remote code execution vulnerability in WordPress or something like that. It always just keeps cropping up. Now, one of the tools that the hackers had took publicly known bugs in WordPress, created automated scanners to find and exploit these plugins, and what they would do is when they would exploit these vulnerable plugins, they would then upload web shelves to give themselves backdoors. Now, essentially, what a web shell is it's like the same thing as reverse shell. It's just a way to give the threat actors access to run commands on the server, read files, perform network reconnaissance, laterally move across the network, things like that. In other words, something you really don't want to have a threat actor doing on your web server. So the threat actors allegedly directed this tool at over 45,000 Breeze plugins on WordPress and successfully backdoored 17,000. So, yeah, I mean, technically that's less than a 50% success rate, but that's still a very large success rate. Like the fact that they were able to just throw this tool at 45,000 plugins of known exploits. So, in other words, there should theoretically, and I would say almost certainly, are patches available for these plugins, yet over 17,000 of them still managed to get exploited. Like, that is whoever is the like admins of these WordPress sites, you really need to get your act together on making sure your plugins are updated because the most embarrassing and sad kind of exploit is when there is a known bug, a known vulnerability, and there is a patch to fix it, and it has been out in some cases for months or even years, and it still is being exploited in the wild. Like I mean, it just screams laziness. Like, I mean, a lot of servers you can like have some sort of like automatic updates to, and even if you don't want to have automatic updates, you can like set up a cron job or some other kind of job to automatically like run updates on a schedule. Now, then you could potentially run into this issue of like potential downtime, and of course there's ways to mitigate that. But yeah, I mean, this shouldn't be this large scale of an issue. Like there was another exploit where they were trying to attack some other plugin, and they fired like again like tens or hundreds of thousands of attacks at it, and only like a handful, like I think it was less than 100, actually got exploited. Now, still, that's not great. Obviously, the number should be zero, but significantly less than the Breeze plugin, which is why it was the worst of the offenders. Um, so yeah, I guess the moral of the story here is to make sure that your WordPress plugins are up to date, or better yet, just don't use WordPress at all. Like, I mean, you could, if you really need to. I mean, my personal go-to is to just create my own website and have it fairly static. It's kind of nice that way. You don't really have to worry about these kinds of bugs and exploits and these types of content management systems. But I digress. I understand that not everybody is technically savvy enough to create their own website from scratch. Now, with that being said, uh, the websites that I've made for myself, I don't actually write them from scratch. I just find like free templates that I like and then just modify them to suit my liking. That is one of the nice things about open source. You can find something you like, make it your own, and it's a good time. Or you could have hire someone that actually knows how to build websites to build it for you. The only issue with that one is then if they go away and you don't know how to work it, then you kind of run into some problems. But yeah, at the very least, if you're going to use WordPress or some other kind of content management system, you got to make sure that it and all of its plugins are always up to date because they are such a common attack vector for threat actors. So, on the topic of cybersecurity and all of that fun stuff, we have to talk about some of the latest drama that's been going on with Flock. Now, if you're not familiar with Flock or Flock security, essentially what this is it's like a collection of cameras that's being put all over the place in order to, how do I put this in a politically correct manner, to aid in surveillance and stopping crimes, I guess is the best way to put it. Because these are definitely not mass surveillance machines, obviously lacking manners, spying on and reporting on your every move. Of course not. But in my head canon, The headcanon that I have for Flock is while the Zuck technically isn't a founder or even listed as a founder, he is a major investor and the one pulling the strings because this is something directly up the Zuck's alley, monitoring everybody's every move, gathering as much data on everyone as possible, and using that to do whatever his heart desires, I guess. Um, Now, is he actually a investor or founder? Obviously, he's not a founder. He's not listed. Is he a major investor? Who knows? Maybe not. Maybe not. But in my head canon, he definitely is because this is just something right up his alley. But anyway, what is Flock? Flock is a mass surveillance system meant to track your every movement. Excuse me. Sorry. That's actually not what I meant. What I meant to say was it's not a mass surveillance system and is a purpose built tool focused on vehicle information and safety incidences. Yes. So take off your tinfoil hats, everyone. It's super legit, very trustworthy, and uh, the folks at Flock even said as much that these cameras can't track you. So case closed. We can wrap it up for the day. If you enjoyed this episode, I'm just kidding. Uh, um, so technically, yes, a single individual camera, as Flock pointed out on their website, cannot technically, quote unquote, track you. Now, they're not 100% wrong, but they're not 100% right either. Any device that takes a picture of your car driving past with a timestamp and geolocation data is by its very nature tracking you. It knows exactly where you were, when you were, and if that's not the definition of tracking, I don't know what is. Now, technically, you could make the argument that yes, that one camera saw you were here at this time, but it has no idea of knowing where you went after that. And yes, you are technically correct. But when you have this entire network of these flock cameras all across, say, a suburb area or a city, taking pictures of your car the entire route from its point from A to B, yes, a single camera cannot track your every move. But when you string all of those cameras together and pull all the information to one source, oh, they were at this camera at this time, then this one, then this one, then this one, then this one. Oh, look, here is the route they took. And that is the definition of tracking you in your car. Now, it's so that's really where their argument falls apart. Yes, on the single camera level, you could technically make the argument. It's not a very strong one, but you could still technically make it and not be 100% wrong. Um, but the fact that it's also worth noting that different organizations can own these cameras, so not all of them are going to one place. So I guess the other part of the argument that Flock is making is yeah. So maybe all of those maybe you got picked up by like 10 cameras along your route, but you drove through like a couple different police precincts, so they're owned by different police precincts, and maybe some of them are owned by a company or something along the way. But the thing with like police, for instance, is if they're trying to do an investigation, they'll most likely talk to like neighboring, police people and can kind of source all that data together. So for technically they could say, well, if you cross county lines, they would be in different jurisdictions. But again, you could also just kind of clump all that data together, source it together when, law enforcement agencies are sharing notes. Um, but that's just the tip of the iceberg because they also, in addition to video cameras to get license plates, they also have just regular video cameras, audio recorders, and soon they're supposedly going to be launching drones as well, because that sounds like a great idea. And let's also not forget about the documented cases of these cameras being placed at rather, shall we say, curious locations, like pointed directly at somebody's house or directly at a certain venue in a strip center or something. Why are they pointed there when they should supposed to be monitoring the road and the parking lots, and but they're pointed directly at somebody's house? I mean, at that point, you have lost all of your privacy at your house if there is one of these cameras pointed directly at your front door or in your backyard. You're being watched your every move. Now, they might try to say that that's not what's going on, but there have also been cases of these cameras like they'll detect movement and they'll follow the movement. And of course, the people over at Flock make the argument it's not tracking humans, it's just seeing movement and following the movement. Like I feel like at that point you're just calling the same thing, just using different verbiage. I guess you could also, I guess by their verbiage, it would also maybe include like animals as well. Um, but regardless, the other issue with these cameras is Flock claims that only authorized individuals can monitor these cameras. But since these are just IP cameras, aka cameras connected to the internet, large numbers of them were publicly exposed to the internet and might still be for the entire world to see and access. And what this means is if you found one of these Flock cameras' IP addresses, you could go to its web portal, log in, which may or may not be difficult to do, and get active live analytics, images, whatever from the camera. So explain to me how that's not a terrible practice, right? Like, this is one of the many reasons why you don't want to have Internet of Things devices exposed to the public internet, because this is what you're asking to have happen. And this is also why, if you want your own like security cameras at your house, you should make sure, at least if you care about your privacy in any way, that they don't reach out to the public internet in any capacity. They're only accessible on your internal network, ideally isolated to their own VLAN or virtual local area network, so they can only talk to each other and nothing else. And then you have the ability to access into that VLAN to check up on what these cameras are doing, and then you can have some kind of like, I think it's called NVR, like network video recorder or something, to like save the footage to, so it's not like gone immediately. And then that way you can like review the footage later, but everything is contained local, nothing leaves your house. So if you actually care about your privacy, that is the way that you do cameras. You don't have them publicly exposed to the internet like this. So, not sure what Flock was thinking when they were doing that, but to each their own. Um, so this is like the textbook example, though, of privacy versus security. Now, we've talked extensively on this podcast about this concept where if you want something to be more convenient, or doing something to quote unquote protect you, you're almost always sacrificing your privacy in sake of that, right? So if you want something to be more convenient for you, you're gonna sacrifice your privacy and or security in order to make it so, right? Like if you want it to be easier to log into your various accounts, you pick an easy password to remember and use it across all of your accounts. Yes, that's very convenient for you, but that is horrible for your security. Same thing when it comes to the privacy aspect. Whenever, someone wants to make the think of the children argument to in order to reduce, things like encryption or other ways to keep your information private, it's a way to quote protect you, but in reality it's just more allowing whoever to gather more information on you in order to make better decisions about how to quote unquote protect you. So you're sacrificing your privacy for this supposed promise of protection and safety. Whether that's a fair trade-off, you can of course make your own decision on that. Which, I mean, I guess to their point, if you deploy a mass surveillance system to spy on everyone, I'm sure you'll catch more crimes and stop more criminals. But is that justification enough for invading everybody's privacy against their will? Now, you could also make the argument, which I don't really want to hear, that if you have nothing to hide, then you shouldn't care about this. And I think that's a really terrible argument for a couple of reasons. In this case in particular, like, yes, I don't have anything to hide when I'm in my car driving to, say, a doctor's appointment, but why is that anybody's business that I'm going to a doctor's appointment? Why does anybody need to know who my doctor is or where it's located? That's none of your business. I don't have anything to hide about it, but it's still none of your business. So that's one thing. But let's also acknowledge the fact that these flock systems use the power of artificial intelligence to read license plates. And there have been numerous documented cases where these license plate AI readers misread the license plate, mark the vehicle as using stolen plates, and the driver or even owner of the vehicle gets pulled over by the cops and gets interrogated and sometimes even detained because they think they're driving with stolen plates, even though they're not, because this Flock AI license plate reader told them so. So if that's, I mean, that alone should be a reason to not have these things. If your technology isn't good enough to accurately read license plates and you're deploying it as like a source of truth for this, I mean, that just doesn't seem like, why would you put this beta technology in the public to be, it's like using beta software in production. Like, it's just a terrible idea. There's a reason why people don't do this. Now, I understand it's AI, and AI is in perpetual beta for the foreseeable future and potentially for all eternity, because the issue with all of these large language machine learning models is they're inherently non-deterministic, which means you can never know what they're actually going to spit out. You might be able to get a decent idea of what they might give you, but you can never know for 100% certain, which is why everything's always in beta, because none of these companies can ever guarantee with 100% accuracy that it won't make stuff up, it won't give you false information, and it won't be completely unpredictable and potentially unhinged. And that's one of the large issues with artificial intelligence these days. Now, granted, it's come a long ways since, Chat GPT first burst onto the scene, but it's still a long way from perfect. And if you ask me, a piece of software shouldn't be used in production if it, like, you get to the point where if you have something in beta for years and years and years and years and years, some people might want to start asking the question, okay, when is this actually going to become a finalized product, right? Because but we're kind of getting off the topic a little bit here. Um, but yes, another thing well, I guess another resource that I'd direct you to is there is a YouTuber called Upper Echelon, which you may or may not have heard of before, but he did a pretty fantastic video diving into some actual specific cases of flock and some like some of these like cases like I talked about of like the license plates being misread and things like that. So I'll have his video linked in the description. So if you want to go check that out, of course you can. But one thing that's also rather peculiar about this totally 100% reputable company that is keeping us all safe and secure is the fact that it intentionally opted out of the Internet Archive. So, in other words, they basically told the Internet Archive, which its sole job is to kind of scrape the internet and like archive pages. So, for instance, if a website goes offline, like for whatever reason, like it's still preserved in the Internet Archive, so you can go back and see historically what it used to look like, things like this. And Flock decided that no, we don't want that. And to me, that's pretty sketchy because one thing that some which I mean, it's really like a cover your butt type of a thing because it's basically giving them free will to gaslight everyone into saying that they're wrong because no, our website doesn't actually say that, it says this, and point to what their website actually says at the current moment, and discrediting any screenshots as fake because there's no backup in the Internet Archive, for instance, to prove that those people were actually correct, which to me, that just seems like a really, really sketchy business practice, right? Like, if you want to talk about if you have nothing to hide, if you have nothing to hide about your business practices, why are you preventing your website from being documented over the course of history unless you're intentionally trying to cover things up because people are finding stuff out that is probably not so good, so then you can change it on your website to make it look better for PR, and then you can discredit everyone and gaslight everyone into thinking that the other version of what people saw before wasn't actually real. Now, like, yeah, that to me, that just seems very, very sketchy. Now, I could go on and on and on about how terrible this is and yada yada yada, but I think we spent probably enough time on this, and we have some other things that we need to get to in this episode. But if you want some more information, I'll have a couple links down in the show notes, as well as that link to the upper echelon video, which I would encourage you to check out if you want even more information. So, with all of this depressing subject matter we've been talking about, let's have something a little more lighthearted with what nerdy stuff have I been up to this week. So, one thing that I haven't really done a whole lot with is home labbing. I mean, I've done some, like, in terms of like messing around with services and stuff, but I haven't, it's been a hot minute since I got myself some new hardware to play with. And part of that is, let's be honest, RAM prices are kind of crazy town, and storage prices are also not the best either. Everything in the home lab space seems to be getting more expensive, and for anyone that's just trying to break onto the home lab scene, I do feel really bad for you because it wasn't this bad. As someone that's been doing it for years now, things were significantly cheaper a few years ago, so you're not just imagining that. I had the story about how much I paid for 4 sticks of ECC DDR4 RAM. It was like 128 gigs for like $100, and now you're lucky to get like one stick of 32 gigabyte ECC DDR4 RAM for $100. It's kind of insane. Um, but the main update that I have is when Prime Day happened like a month ago, I got myself a new network switch. And this network switch, I saw they did a review. I think it was on Serve the Home. I think they had a review on it. It was the Solata, I think is what it's called, switch. Basically, what it is it's a 12 port, 10 gig switch, which fantastic. I've been saying for a while that I needed to get myself a 10 gig switch because the Brocade switch I have right now is great. It does what all I needed to do, but I only have one open SFP plus port, which is the 10 gig ports left. So if I ever wanted to expand into the future, I'd basically be out of luck. So that was one of the driving factors for the Switch. But one of the nice things about it is it has both SFP Plus and RJ45 10 gig ports. So it has 4 RJ45 and 8 SFP Plus ports, which is pretty nice because it allows you to kind of have that flexibility of using one over the other. Like, for instance, I already have one of those SFP Plus to RJ45 like optical converter things that I was using for my Mac Mini. So what I was able to do is plug the Mac Mini's RJ45 10 gig connection directly into this new switch, and then use that existing optic, adapter that I had to connect the two switches together so I can get a direct link back to the main switch. So that's pretty cool, and that still, of course, leaves me two RJ45s to work with and the rest of the SFP pluses. I was debating whether I wanted to swap over the other 10 gig connections I had going to the Brocade switch currently, which is my NAS, and one to my Dell R620, but I figured they're fine as they are right now. No need to mess with anything at the moment. I feel like at some point I'll probably move them over, but haven't gotten to that yet. But one thing that is pretty nice about this Switch is it's relatively quiet. Now, if you've dealt with network switches before, especially enterprise ones, you know that those things love to scream, especially when you first power them on. Now, the Brocade switch, I did a fan modification to. I don't remember if I talked about it on the podcast before or not, but I replaced the fans in it to some quieter ones. Now, when the fans ramp up, it's still loud and you can still hear it, but it's significantly quieter, especially at idle compared to the stock fans. And when it's existing in the same space as me, even if it's in a different room, I appreciate the fact that it's quieter. Now, this new Switch that I got, I think it only has one fan in it, and when you first power plug it in and it boots up, I mean it's kind of loud like any network switch would be when it first boots up, unless it's like a passively cooled one. But not as loud as the Brocade switch. And once it's like all booted up and everything, it's pretty quiet. Now, I have noticed that its fans do ramp up from time to time to like cool it down, kind of like the Brocade's does. Now, part of that might be it's literally sitting directly on top of the Brocade switch, which definitely isn't helping the cooling aspect of it. But even with the, fan ramping up sometimes, it's not nearly as loud as the Brocade switch. And the only time I can really notice it is if I'm actively listening for it and I'm kind of close to where the room is or actually inside the room. Only then can I notice that the fan is actually ramped up. So otherwise, it just kind of blends into the background of all the other server fan noise. Unlike the Brocade switch, which when those fans ramp up, it's pretty easy to tell when they ramp up. Now, if I'm like downstairs, like on the main level, I can sometimes hear them ramp up. I mean, it kind of depends on what other noises are going on in the house at the moment. But especially if I'm like upstairs, like in my working in my office or something, and I have the door open, I can easily hear when those fans kick on from the Brocade. So this switch is definitely quieter. It is a managed switch, so you can do things like VLANs and all that good stuff. I don't think that there is a terminal interface. Like, I don't believe you can SSH into this thing. So, I believe that there's only a web application, which is a little bit of a bummer. Um, but not, the end of the world by any stretch of the imagination. You keep this thing, isolated and everything. Of course, not publicly exposed to the internet. Have a good password on it. You'll probably be okay. Um, but I mean, it works. I mean, like most managed switches, it works right out of the box. Has a dumb switch, so you don't really have to configure anything. The only thing that I really configured, obviously, was updating the password from the default, and then changing the IP address so it's actually accessible, without having to manually set an IP address on its predefined network that it wanted to be on. So it's actually I can actually access it because otherwise, anytime I wanted to connect to the switch, I would have to manually set my IP address to something else within its network, assuming I even remembered what it was, and then and then connect to it to do whatever I needed to do. Which, in fairness, is not actually a terrible security practice, right? Like have it completely off, isolated on its own network because even though it can't talk to anything, it's still able to route traffic just fine between it, the other switch, and the other devices on my network. Like when I first plugged it in, I couldn't access it at all, but I still was able to get internet and connect to other things on the network because it's just doing its switch job, right? It's working on like the L2 level, not necessarily the L3 level, or L2 level being MAC address level, not necessarily the network level, that being IP addresses. But in order to actually access it and configure it, I had to manually configure my IP address to be on the network that it was on in order to set that up, which again, that's not necessarily a terrible thing to have, right? Because it's completely isolated in that regard. So, more secure from potential threat actors getting in and trying to mess with your network. So, Not necessarily a terrible practice. I mean, that is part of the reason why, in an ideal world, if you're configuring a network, all of your kind of management devices like that are completely isolated from everything else on the network. Because if you get to one of those, you kind of get free reign over everything. So yeah, but yeah, just thought I would bring that up. So far, have been pretty happy with it. It's been working pretty great for me. So definitely been enjoying that. Now, the next thing I wanted to talk about is I needed to address the Zuck for a second again. What the heck and who at Facebook decided it was a good idea that when you open the Facebook app to immediately open Reels and start playing them with the audio on? I want names, people. I demand some kind of action to be taken because this I don't know who decided this was a good idea, but it is a horrible idea. This toxic sewage, radioactive garbage dumpster fire of an app already doesn't show you the pages you like as it is, but now to default to reels playing on max volume for things that you don't even like or subscribe or follow is just absolutely absurd. Now, to be fair, 95% of what Facebook suggests to you anyway is completely removed from any pages you follow or groups you're a part of or friends that you're friends with. Most of the time, it's just suggested content anyway because that's what Facebook is. It's just how can we get as milk as much money out of these people as possible? We don't care if we actually show them, what they like or what they want to see. We'll just show them what we think they want to see. Um, so imagine the embarrassment that someone would have if they opened this app in public with the sound on and their phone just starts blasting audio from who knows what reel. I mean, that is could potentially be pretty mortifying if we're being honest. So Zuck, Facebook, Meta, whoever, did you even think this through? Because this just sounds like a horrible idea. I don't know who on the Facebook team thought that this was a good idea. I don't know what director or vice president or who gave this the green light. But I would expect to see a job opening for whatever that position is if it hasn't already been produced, because I think this is a fireable offense, to be honest. um, of course, I am kind of joking a little bit, but the funny thing is, there was actually, in a similar vein, there was a meme a couple weeks ago with the whole like LeBron James trying to look for a new team thing. Like apparently the Heat uh quote unquote accidentally leaked like LeBron's decision like days before it was allegedly going to happen, like kind of giving the impression that it was going to the Heat. And it might have been fake, but then someone like posted like a day or two later like a job opening for like the director of YouTube strategy or something like that at the Miami Heat, which I thought was absolutely hilarious. I don't know if any of it was actually true, but the fact that that happened, just the story, even if it's not true, in my head canon, I want to believe it because it's just so hilarious. Um, but anyway, um, while we're hating on Meta, let's also take a moment to address how terrible their settings are. Because in order to disable this, you kind of have to do some things, right? And anything related to Meta's apps, especially in regards to like all their privacy settings, you basically need an IGN step-by-step walkthrough guide in order to navigate their settings pages, because not only are they terribly laid out, they're very ambiguous, they're overly generic. So good luck trying to find anything in their settings without having a step-by-step walkthrough guide telling you exactly how to do it. And the other issue is, because Meta loves to do this A/B testing type of a thing and rolling out features slowly, sometimes your layout of the app isn't the same as the layout of the app that you're following on the walkthrough. So the walkthrough you're following doesn't even work because the app is different. So I don't know what kind of dumpster fire is going on over at Meta, but they really need to get their act together because I mean, I don't understand how their user experience metrics aren't in the toilet because I mean, I understand like I don't like Facebook and I don't like Meta, so I'm obviously going to be critical of them, but just like the pure usability perspective, like I'm thinking of my friends and family members that aren't as technically literate as I am having to walk through these menus. Like, I don't understand where I'm going, and I know technology, and I would consider myself to be pretty tech savvy. And if I don't know how to navigate through these menus, I don't know how Facebook and Meta expects anyone that's less tech savvy to be able to navigate them. And I assume that's probably part of their business model because if you don't know how to opt out of their auto opt in features to collect as much data on you as possible, how are you going to opt out? So they're not telling you you can't opt out. They're just making it so difficult to opt out that you don't because it's either not worth the effort or you can't figure out how to do it. So that's my at least opinion on why they're doing this. Now, I that has no answer or anything for the Reels decision. I don't know where that came from. Um, I guess I just got unlucky one day with Apple or not Apple, Facebook's A/B testing shenanigans. I guess I don't know. I did eventually figure out how to disable it after looking online through guides for a few minutes. But yeah, that was fun. I just figured I needed to bring that up. And the last thing I wanted to touch on is what we started this episode with, kind of bringing this whole thing full circle, and that is the death of physical media in the game industry, specifically with Sony. Now, Sony announced that they are killing physical disc production at the end of January 2028 for new games releasing on PlayStation consoles. Now, this announcement comes after Rockstar made the decision that they weren't going to be selling physical discs for GTA 6, which, I mean, first off, GTA 6 is apparently finally happening, allegedly. I guess we'll see if and when it actually supposedly releases later this year. But with how big GTA 5 was, I I don't even know if it would be physically possible for them to release GTA 6 on a physical medium. Like I don't know if they could fit it on a disc. It might be one of those things where it's like the old school days where you'd have like multiple CDs or floppy disks to install a program with. That would be basically GTA 6, I think. Um so I guess from that perspective it's kind of understandable, but for every other PlayStation game to be going the way the Dino in terms or the Dodo Bird, whichever one you want to go with, in terms of physical media, it's just kind of a bummer, right? Because as we kind of talked at the beginning, the idea of being able to own a game, buy the game, and being able to play it whenever you want, regardless of if the servers are online, was one of the largest selling points of actually owning your own media. And with this going away, it kind of raises the question of if you buy something on, one of these digital storefronts, if they decide that this doesn't meet their terms of service or whatever the heck may be, can they remove it and you no longer have access to the game? Because you could make the argument, well, you paid for it, so you should still be able to have access. Well, yes, but tell that same story to those who bought movies and TV shows on Crunchyroll and then proceeded to have them stripped away and lose all access to them because of the issues that went on with Crunchyroll. Um, so it goes back to the age-old saying of if you don't actually own the thing, like if it's not tangible in your hands, you don't actually own it, which is where the those in the piracy community like to make the argument, well, if buying isn't owning, then pirating isn't stealing type of a deal, right? Like if buying the thing on your platform doesn't mean I own it, then me downloading it illegally does not mean I'm stealing it. Now, the other thing with piracy too is there's it you're not I mean, yes, you're downloading it illegally and violating copyright, of course, and all that goodness. But you're not technically stealing it, right? You're just That's not how digital works. You're just making another copy of it, right? Like if you have the original, like say Blu-ray rip on your computer that you ripped from like your Blu-ray collection, if you then give that to someone else, they didn't steal that, they just got a copy of it. Like, the original still exists on your computer, you just gave them a copy, and that's kind of like how piracy works in a nutshell, is someone creates the original source, however they came into possession of that, and then other people will link up with them and basically download a copy, and then through torrenting, everyone that has a copy will collectively join together to give everyone else copies, which is why torrenting can be significantly faster than downloading from a single source. But again, torrenting, it does not equal piracy. You can torrent, other things aside from copyrighted media. Almost, I think the majority of Linux distributions. I know this is ironic to say because people like to use the term Linux ISOs when talking about their copyrighted media archives that they may or may not have acquired legitimately. Um, but other things like preserving, like one of the other things that was actually torrented not too long ago was that gigantic database breach of all those passwords that got leaked. That was like, I don't remember how many gigabytes worth in like a single text file. That was all via torrent. So there are other things. It's not just illegal pirated stuff, but um, the point of this that I kind of got off topic with is the fact that if you the issue and the distrust amongst the, I guess, purists or those that like physical media is, if I buy something, I want the ability to play it and use it on my terms and not be subjected to you. Because if I'm subjected to you, I didn't actually buy and own the thing. I just bought the permission to be able to use it as long as you allow me to use it, right? It's like buying versus leasing a car, right? If you buy the car outright, the car is yours and you can do whatever the heck you want with it. But if you lease the car, there are significantly more restrictions on what you can do with that car, right? Like you wouldn't be able to modify it. You're potentially limited on how many miles you can drive it every year. You're more limited and your insurance rates are going to be higher. There are other factors that go into play with that. So it's the same thing, right? Like if buying isn't owning, what is the point in buying it in the first place, right? Like if I'm going to the PlayStation Network to buy and download a game, why would I want to buy a game on there if, say, a couple years down the line the PlayStation Network goes offline and I'm no longer able to play the game anymore? Now, I don't think that would happen. I would like to be optimistic and believe that if you download a game from the PlayStation Network store, even if they take the game off the store, you would still be able to play that game because you downloaded it to your PlayStation, right? I would like to believe that that is the case. The other issue with download only stores, like for PlayStation, for instance, it's very hard to find deals, right? Like you can't buy a used version of a game for a discount if everything is digital, right? Like that's one nice thing about video game collecting is, one, you could potentially play games that don't exist anymore by buying them used. For instance, if the original publisher of the game goes out of business or whatever and they don't produce the game anymore, the only way to play it is either buy an old version of it, like that was produced when when it originally came out, used, or you download a ROM of it, or which some people, Nintendo, would consider that piracy. But if the only way to play the game is via a emulator and a ROM, I mean, I don't understand how you could, cry wolf about it being piracy. Like in Nintendo's case, I'm going to harp on Nintendo here for a second. They would claim that, something is piracy and, using emulators and downloading ROMs, which sure, But if you don't give the users the ability to download or buy your game legitimately, what other choice are you giving them, right? Like, which is one of the nice things about, having physical media is even once the game is no longer in production, you can still play it by getting a used copy, whether that's getting, borrowing it from your friend, buying it off eBay, going to GameStop, whatever the case is. You can still play the game even after it's no longer available anymore, which that is one issue with digital stores. Once it's gone from the digital store, it's gone. You can't really get it back. Now, the other thing is sales. I mean, I guess you could maybe buy like a digital code on some other platform, like maybe GameStop would sell digital codes discounted, but you're not really going to see discounts that much on these like first party stores, right? Which was another reason why owning physical media was such a good thing, because you could, find Black Friday deals. You could, find other sales going on throughout the year to get the games for cheaper than what their actual retail price was. And then there's the other aspect of if you own the game and it becomes like, a cult classic or something and skyrockets in value, you could theoretically then sell that to someone and make money off of it, which if it's all digital, you can't really do that, especially if it's still able to be downloaded, right? Now, the other thing, because if it's all digital, what are you going to do? Like sell your PlayStation with the game on it so you can, sell the game? Like, I don't believe PlayStation would allow you to transfer or somehow export your digital copy of the game and give it to someone else. I don't believe that's how that's going to be able to work. So yeah, it's definitely a bummer that digital media is going away, or physical media is going away, rather, because I'm not sure I necessarily want to live in a world where I can't actually own my own video games. Now, of course, I'm probably going to have to, because I think Sony doing this is just kind of the excuse for other companies like, I guess technically Xbox is Microsoft. But I mean, even Microsoft has kind of already started pushing for this. And both Microsoft and Sony have been pushing their kind of digital only consoles for a while now. And so I think it's only a matter of time before Xbox is digital only, and heck, even whatever Nintendo's next console after the Switch is digital only. It would not surprise me in the slightest if, say, by I think so, Sony's is 2028 when they're going to stop doing physical. I think it's probably not out of the realm of possibility that by the time of like 2030 comes around, I think the number of games that are going to be sold as physical copies is going to be almost zero, if not zero, at that point. Part of that it would be because consoles would just no longer support physical media, as seen by some of the new PlayStations that come out. Like right now, I think they just killed off the last PlayStation. I think the PS5. I don't think you can get a new one anymore with a disc cartridge or a disc reader. Now, if you can, it's one of those like you have to like attach it separately. It's not like natively built in. Which when I was looking for my PS5, I had to scour the internet in order to find one that still was like the original, came with a disc reader, because it just like everywhere at that time, and that was like over 2 years ago at this point, everything was just like digital only. And I was like, that I'm not doing that. Right? Like I want my physical game cartridges. Now, maybe or I guess discs. Maybe I'm old school because I grew up in that age of being able to have physical cartridges and physical discs that you would, be able to play with. But I just like that ability to like, collect the things, because the other thing too is they just look really nice on a shelf, right? Like even when you're not playing the games, just being able to kind of like have them displayed, like it's kind of like a decorative thing too, right? Like if you go all digital, you can't display them, on like a bookshelf. Like if you have physical media, you can display them on a bookshelf just like a book collector would, like, display all their books, right? You can look at them, admire them, and then, that art form, or maybe not an art form, but the joy of, trying to figure out what game I want to play and perusing your library on the shelf of what game you want to play. Or if you were like me back in the day, sifting through all of your various cartridges in order to figure out which game you wanted to play. There was some kind of joy in that, and I feel like that is going to be significantly lost if everything goes digital now. Uh, we're kind of running long on this episode, so I don't want to necessarily belabor the point too much. But yeah, we're getting to the point where everything is just going digital, for better or for worse. Now, there obviously are some benefits to everything going digital, right? Like it's a lot easier to preserve media if it's digitized, right? Like if it's on a physical cartridge, if for whatever reason that cartridge dies, like a component fails on it, or the memory like gets corrupted or destroyed or something, the cartridge is no longer usable. But if you have a digital backup of the game, or, in some kind of digital form, whether it's like a video game or even like a song or a movie or TV show, if it's digitized, you could obviously have bit rot, of course, but there are many services and, programs and stuff to help prevent that. I mean, TrueNAS, not to go back to home labbing here, but TrueNAS, like in ZFS, one of the nice things about those is it kind of like can help prevent that and kind of like do active things to reverse the effects of it, like to prevent it from happening in the first place. And if it's in a digital form, you could, do the whole 3-2-1 backup strategy, keep it all preserved, and basically preserve it through eternity, assuming there is digital in existence, right? Like, I guess if the apocalypse happens tomorrow and all, like, everything in the cloud gets nuked, if any of your digital copies in the cloud no longer function, but if you still have your game console, you can still plug in your cartridge and play it. So I guess you could make the argument both ways, but from the preservation aspect, I think I would tend to lean a little more in the camp of digital is better for preservation, just because theoretically 20, 30, 50, 100 years from now, once these like original discs and cartridge wear out, I mean, they have a shelf life, they're built on physical materials. Eventually, they're going to wear out. There's nothing you can really do with it at that point. Where if you digitized it and made it digital, as long as you have something that can either play that video file back, emulate that console to play the game, whatever the case is, you can keep playing that indefinitely as long as there is technology enabling it so, which I think, unless like some kind of apocalyptic event happens, will most likely exist into the future. So maybe that's the silver lining in all of this but I guess the the big elephant in the room there is, of course, you have to have digital copies in the first place, which you can have outside of these digital stores, right? So, which, in an ironic twist, when it comes to video game piracy is one of like the like pioneers in terms of like preserving video game history, because by creating pirated versions of these otherwise proprietary games that you can't get in a digital version, they at the same time are basically ensuring that these video games get to live on into eternity, which, I mean, you could still make the ethical argument of is piracy good or not, but at least from that perspective of preserving, the history and the playability of the game, even after long after like the storefront or whatever goes down, I think we can all agree that that is a positive, even if there are a lot of negatives that come along with it. Because a lot of like, there are some games out there that are just so obscure and so niche that it's almost impossible to actually find a physical cartridge of the actual game itself. So the only way to be able to play it and experience it is through one of these digital versions. And the same thing goes, with old video games as well. Like old video games, are getting to the point where they're so nostalgic and they cost so much on the used market that they're prohibitively expensive in order for you to actually play them legitimately. So the only way to play them is through a most likely pirated copy of the game in order to be able to play it. But again, when you get into that kind of sphere of it, the piracy argument, at least in my opinion, kind of falls apart because if there's no legitimate legal way to acquire the game and like if the company's not producing the game anymore, it doesn't matter if you buy the game used or if you download it illegally. The company's not getting the money regardless. Like they're not producing it anymore, so they're not making any money off of it. So at that point, I think the piracy argument tends to kind of fall. Its strength significantly weakens. But in some cases, like I said, that's literally the only way to experience the game because the game could be so rare, so niche, so expensive, not to mention that you have to have the original console most likely to even play the game in the first place, which also adds an additional cost. So using an emulator and a downloaded ROM is a lot of ways the only way to play some of these older games for most people. So that is one benefit of digital, but again, it kind of comes down to the point of if it's only digital from the get-go, being able to get a I guess rip or the ROM, without all the DRM and everything. I'm not sure what that process is going to look like in the future. But again, like I said, there are pros and cons to it, obviously. But if the digital world, the digital only world, we can still exist where you can download the media, you own it, you can play it for as long as you want, even after the network goes offline or whatever. I think that's still an acceptable outcome, not preferred, but acceptable. And as long as these games can be historically preserved in some way, I think that is also an acceptable outcome. So, as much as I hate to see the physical media going away, I still would like to hope that there is at least still some potential positives here that could come out of it. So, we got to kind of keep looking on the bright side. Now, there's been a lot of doom and gloom in this podcast, a lot of punches we've taken, and this podcast episode is already running very, very long. But there is one thing I wanted to end on that is kind of brightened my day when I saw this, and hopefully it brings a smile to everyone else's face. So there is a GitHub issue, which I will have linked in the show notes down below, for a repository called, I think it's Latterly 3, I think. And it's issue number 639. The issue says, "Hello, owner. As you know, we train our models to code by scraping open source repositories on GitHub. A recent root cause analysis showed that the code in this repository is so bad that it is single-handedly reducing average model performance by 91%. If you had never opened this repository, there is a 21% chance that we would have already cured cancer. Let that sink in. Please delete this repository immediately. Thank you. OpenAI Model Training Acquisition Team." So that is the message, which is hilarious. The reacts on this thing is incredible. We have almost 400 kind of laughing emojis. We have 28 rocket ships. We have 84 thumbs ups. We have 19 celebrations. It's fantastic. The comments are absolute gold. Here's one. LOL. I agree wholeheartedly with that one. In- Instead of just deleting, just rename it to Batterly. That's pretty good. Let's see. But there's 142 issues. Seems like there's plenty of people involved. I wonder who those people are. Hang on a sec. Um, And then here is the gold comment buried in this. Hey, lead maintainer here. Thanks for reporting. I took a look at the issue and decided, and it's the emoji with like the eyes like looking up, like, kind of like the pouty eyes with like the one finger pointed one way and the other finger pointed the other way. It kind of hurts my feelings. Also, wanted to say, no, you. So good, so good. Now, the funny thing about this is this issue is obviously satire, because if you scroll down in the comments, there's like links to other issues that basically are the exact same thing. I'm pretty sure it's like a running joke on this repository, which is hilarious. But the fact that this post exists like just made my day. Like the funny thing, because the thing is like I could totally see some like tone deaf like AI company like trainer being mad that their training data is bad because of like some open source repo that they're stealing, sourcing from on GitHub, and it's causing like their model to not be as good, like when it's literally their own fault that they included that in their data set, and then to come complain to the maintainer to like delete it. So which I find hilarious, and then the maintainer's response of like, it kind of hurts my feelings. It's like in the most like sarcastic manner possible. It's absolute gold. So yeah, I just thought that was funny. The whole thread has some real good nuggets in here, so I would encourage you to kind of read through that, and to give yourself a little bit of a pick me up, after this mostly a downer of an episode. I did try to throw some positive things in there as well to not make it super downer, but that's just kind of how the cookie crumbles sometimes. But with that, let's close off and finish out with our trivia question for the week. So this week's trivia question is, when was Blu-ray disc technology released? So when was Blu-ray disc technology released? If you said 2006, specifically June 20th, 2006, congratulations, you got this week's trivia question correct. And if you enjoyed this episode, definitely be sure to leave it a rating and review, and subscribe if you haven't done so already. And also be sure to share with a friend or family member, if you think that they might like this episode. I know it was a little bit of a downer, but we did cover a decent amount of topics. If you have any questions about this episode, or if you have any comments, topics, or ideas for future episodes, you can always shoot me an email at contact@darkassassinsinc.com. Or if you're on YouTube, you can always leave a comment down below. That works as well. And that's going to do it for me in this episode of the Dark Assassins podcast. Until next time, my fellow assassins, remember, full nothing equals true. If action not equal to null, return true. I'll see you next time on the Dark Assassins podcast.